Hello and welcome to part 3, everyone. So we were talking about the errors that we make whenever we have attribution. So now let's move forward and let's talk about some of the influences that impact our perception. Okay. So simply put, we're gonna talk about culture, gender, and personality. Okay. And the interesting thing about this, and the reason why we're talking about this, is because these forces impact our perception outside of our conscious awareness. So culture, gender, and personality become the water the fish swims in, the air that we breathe, okay? Culture, gender, personality, and there's other stuff in the air, okay? But when we're talking about big, unseen, or not conscious influences on our perception, these are going to be 3 of the biggest, okay? So first of all, let's just talk about culture, okay? So culture, we defined it way back in chapter 1. I don't think I talked about it in a screencast, but the book defined it way back in chapter 1. So culture affects whether you see others as similar or different. And here's the thing, folks. We can't not see difference. We see difference. I do not have to disclose to you that my hair looks different than your hair. These are things that we see. We can see difference, okay? And ultimately, you can what we do throughout our life and throughout our socialization is we in-group and out-group, okay? In-group are the groups that we see as similar as ourselves. Out-groups are the ones that are fundamentally dissimilar. And so even within an in-group, you'll find people in-grouping and out-grouping each other, okay? You can throw together a whole bunch of people who love the Denver Broncos or whatever, and so they're in that in group, but then even within that in group, you're gonna have people who are like, well, I've been a fan my whole life, I'm not a fair weather fan, and those people over there are fair weather fans. And the only reason I say that, I actually am not, I don't follow, I know that's weird for me, I'm out grouping myself right now. I am, you know what, I'll in group myself. I am in the in group of people who don't follow the Broncos very much, okay? But I heard some people having a conversation the other day talking about, oh yeah, now they act like it's, you know, and they were basically saying people are fair weather fans. They were out-grouping people who were in their in-group. So anyways, over the course though of our lives, this idea of in and out groups, now, and it might sound bad, it might sound cliquish, but it's actually that we need in-groups. These are important to us. These are important to our identity. They're important to who we are and how we see ourselves and our self-concept. And so, you know, it's one of the most important perceptual distinctions we make. And we feel very passionate about our in-groups, okay? And your book makes a point of saying we're especially tied to the ones that are tied to central aspects of our self-concept, like our sexual orientation, religious beliefs, ethnic heritage, stuff like that. Depending on one of the things that I've noticed, I've lived in 2 states across my life, and they are both states where the people who were born and raised there are extremely proud of it. I was born and raised in Texas, where, you know, like, you bleed Texas, and then I moved to Colorado, where you know, if you were born in Colorado, you're very, very proud of that. It seems. So that can be an in-group. That can be an out-group. Okay. So these in-groups and out-groups. Now there's way more to culture than in-group and out-group, but this is going to impact your perception. This is going to impact the meanings that you make and where you fit and who you are and how you communicate. And fundamentally, whenever we are in communication with someone, are we in the same in-group? Are we not in the same in-group? And how is that going to impact the ways that we see each other, make sense of each other, attribute meaning to each other? What does that mean for the internal and external attributions we're going to make towards each other? Simple in-group and out-group distinction can impact what type of meaning we attribute. And that's why we're studying this, okay? Your book goes into a little more detail with culture, but these are just the high points, okay? The next one is gender. So your book does a really good job of talking about how we are socialized to believe that the male gender and the female gender are just so polar opposite. In fact, back in the 1990s, you probably even still heard of it, there was the book, I think it was by John Gray, that said men are from Mars, women are from Venus, and that's, We're not from different planets. and in fact, that book's full of gender stereotypes. Don't read that and think it's. I know people who've read that book and it's helped them, but it's full of gender stereotypes. Anyways, by the way, gender is our perception of our deals with our perception of ourself. Okay, and so we're socialized to believe that the ends of the gender spectrum are just completely opposite each other, but they're actually really not. Okay. The bulk of the research shows that only about 1% of our communication behavior is influenced by gender. The vast majority of the differences you see, now are there differences between the brains of men and women? Yes, there are. The book talks about that, okay? But does it attribute that much in the ways we behave with each other? Overall, considering everything that's at play there? No, not really. So 1% of communication is influenced by gender. Now, I can say this. That 1% can feel huge. That 1% can feel huge when you're in conflict. And that 1% can feel huge when, you love someone deeply. All right? Or whatever. But a lot of the things that we do when it comes to attaching meaning, that's what we're talking about here with perception, okay? When it comes to attaching meaning to behavior, when it comes to attaching meaning to communication, when we use gender as the thing to attribute that meaning, it's probably something that was socialized into us. We were taught to see certain things a certain way. And your book talks about a study where they got groups of people, two groups of people read the exact same speech to the two groups of people, simply told one group it was written by someone who was male, had the other group say it was written by someone who was female, and their perceptions of what it meant were different. Does that mean that there's actually a difference? No, it means our perceptions of it impacted. Okay, so gender and then personality. Okay, so last week actually we distinguished the difference between self-personality and identity. So here personality is coming into play as a factor that influences our perception. And your book, again, does a good job of talking about this. Personality, our characteristic way of thinking, feeling, acting based on the traits that we possess. So this stuff that we are sort of wired as. Remember, the personality is more of our nature side versus self being the nurture, okay? Personality will impact our perception. And so your book breaks down the big 5 personality traits. You've got openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And so depending on where you're at in each of these, it's going to impact how you perceive your own behavior and the behavior of others. And so, am I high on openness and high on consciousness? That's a funny, high on consciousness. That should be an album name, right? Anyway, openness, consciousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. If I'm high on openness and high on consciousness, then that's going to impact how I perceive your behavior, how I perceive other sensual information, okay? Other sense data. Sensual information sounds different. Sense data, okay? My level of extroversion or introversion, like where am I at in regard to that, is going to kind of impact how I perceive social situations. It's going to impact how I perceive behavior of other people, stuff like that, okay? And then agreeableness and neuroticism. Agreeableness was friendliness also, and then neuroticism is kind of how insecure we are about things. And I mean, that's me nutshelling it, but your personality traits impact your perception. So think about back, I mentioned how we're talking about perception as reality back for our discussion board number 1 and way back in screencast number 1. If perception is reality, think about this. Think about how your personality could impact your reality. Yeah? Hopefully that makes sense. So we have these personality things that impact our perception. And this is one of the reasons why, by the way, it's so good when you get to know the people in your life. the significant others in your life who you really get to know, you start to sort of understand these folks, and you have a good psychological map for the other person. And so you've got your own personality, but then you can start to have a good idea of theirs as well. And when you have a good idea of their personality, you have a good idea of how they're interpreting things, of how they're attributing meaning. That's one of the key points of intimacy, is you get to know someone well enough that you don't just know things about them, okay? That's one thing. It's one thing to know information about someone. It's another thing to understand how they perceive things. It's another thing to understand how they are going to attribute meaning to a certain type of behavior. Over the course of time, I can tell you that my partner and I have come to a place where, and we're approaching 16 years of marriage, my partner and I have come to a place to where I know how she's going to interpret something, even though that's not my interpretation. We can be out somewhere and something will happen, and I know how she's going to attribute meaning to that. And it's not just knowing about someone, stuff about someone, it's about understanding their personality and how that leads to their perception. Okay? What this is an implicit personality theory. Okay? This is different, by the way, than the implicit personal theories we talked about back in week 1. Okay? So implicit personality theories, beliefs about different personality types and the ways in which personality traits cluster together. Your book goes through a really good description of these, and uses Arthur. They've got this exact picture in the book. In fact, I think a lot of these are the same ones. I think I used a template to fill this stuff in. So you've got these theories about how personality types are going to cluster together. And so over the course of your time, you come into this personality, into contact with this personality, this personality, this personality. And you are going to take that data from them, you're going to apply it to your own, and you're going to start to form these ideas of how all this stuff works. And so over the course of time, in my interpersonal relationship, or interpersonal romantic relationship, I've got these theories written out. That, not actually written out, but that I form, that tell me what's going to happen when my spouse runs into a certain situation. Okay? So we have all of these impacts on our perception. And folks, these are just a few of them. Your things that are not included in this list. Your physiology. How tall are you, or are you not? And how does that impact your perception? I'm learning over the course of my life that my perception as being tall, I don't know if you can tell, I'm told I'm tall. I'm 6'3.5". And so my height impacts my perception. My mood, so my internal state, my mood impacts my perception. My previous experiences impact my perception. All of this comes to play. Our book just highlights culture, gender, and personality as big stuff, but there are constant factors changing that impact how we're going to attribute meaning, how we're going to perceive, how we're perceived, and how we perceive others. So one of the things that happens to us is we take in this information and we form impressions of other people. And so this is a big piece of our perception. We have all this stuff going on, and then we form impressions of others. Okay, so we form interpersonal impressions, mental pictures of who people are and how we feel about them. So it's not, the little stuff is there, okay? Oh, they're nice. Oh, they're not nice. That's all there. But we're going to talk about the mental picture of who people are and how we feel about them, and what that means for how we communicate with them. And that will be in our next screencast. I'll see you there.